October 14, 1943. 25,000 feet above Schweinfurt, Germany. The air is thin enough to sting your lungs. Inside the vibrating fuselage of a B-17 Flying Fortress, the temperature is well below freezing. Frost creeps along the metal walls. Machine guns tremble in their mounts as four massive engines roar through the morning sky. Below, the German countryside drifts past in neat squares of farmland and winding rivers. Then the bombardier leans forward over his Norden bombsight. Target in sight. Ahead, through gaps in the clouds, a small Bavarian city appears. Red rooftops, factory chimneys, rail lines threading toward enormous industrial complexes. Schweinfurt. To most people, it looks ordinary. But to the Allied High Command, it is the beating heart of Germany's war machine. Because inside those factories, millions of tiny steel spheres are being produced. Ball bearings, components so small they fit in the palm of your hand, yet so essential that without them, tanks, aircraft engines, and artillery simply cannot function. Destroy Schweinfurt's bearings, and Germany's entire industrial system begins to grind to a halt. At least, that's the theory. For years, many German scientists believed such precision destruction was impossible. Strategic bombing, they argued, was a blunt weapon. Aircraft flying miles above the Earth could never hit specific industrial targets with consistent accuracy. Cities, perhaps. Rail yards, maybe. But individual factories? Impossible. Far below the American bombers, inside reinforced concrete bunkers, German officers watch radar screens glow faint green. The alarms begin to sound. Sirens echo across Schweinfurt. Workers pour from factory floors, abandoning machinery that only moments ago stamped out thousands of polished bearings every hour. Above them, the sky darkens. Not with clouds, with airplanes. Hundreds of them. The formation stretches across miles of sky. B-17 bombers flying in tight combat boxes, their aluminum skins glinting in the autumn sunlight. From the ground, it looks like a swarm of mechanical insects. To German defenders, it's something else entirely. A moving fortress. Flak batteries swivel upward. Massive 88mm cannons bark to life, sending black bursts of shrapnel exploding among the bombers. Inside the B-17, named Royal Flush, the bombardier adjusts the bombsight. Sweat runs down his neck despite the cold. Steady, steady. The Norden bombsight was one of the most guarded secrets of the war. American crews were told it could drop a bomb into a pickle barrel from 20,000 feet. In practice, things were rarely so perfect. Wind drift, flak bursts, fighter attacks, human nerves. Still, Allied planners believed it was precise enough to change the war. Below, the enormous buildings of Kugelfischer and Fichtel and Sachs come into focus. Factories that produced nearly half of Germany's ball bearings. The bombardier tightens his grip on the release switch. Then a voice cuts through the intercom. Bandits. Fighters coming in. The Luftwaffe has arrived. Sleek Messerschmitt Bf-109 slash toward the bomber formation like hunting hawks. Behind them follow heavy Focke-Wulf FW-190s, their cannons flashing. The sky erupts into chaos. Tracer rounds streak across the clouds. Machine guns thunder from every turret of the American bombers. Inside the B-17s, gunners shout coordinates, tracking enemy fighters weaving through the formation. But the bombardier cannot look away. Not now. The target grows larger in the bombsight crosshairs. Flak bursts shake the aircraft violently. Another bomber nearby explodes in a sudden orange fireball. No one has time to react. Bomb bay doors open. The cold wind howls through the aircraft. Thousands of feet below, German workers scramble into shelters as the sirens scream louder. In Berlin, weeks earlier, Nazi officials had been confident. Allied bombing might damage cities, yes, but hitting specific factories? Repeatedly? Precisely? No. German industry was too vast, too resilient. Besides, they believed American bombers simply lacked the accuracy. Soon, they would find out how wrong that assumption could be. Back inside the bomber formation, the bombardier whispers one final word. Bombs away. The aircraft suddenly lurches upward as thousands of pounds of explosives fall free. Dozens of B-17s release their payloads in perfect sequence. Hundreds of bombs begin their silent descent. From 25,000 feet, they fall like dark raindrops, down toward the factories that keep Germany's war machine alive. And down in Schweinfurt, no one yet realizes something chilling. This is only the beginning. Berlin, 1940. Inside the offices of the Reich Air Ministry, thick cigarette smoke hangs in the air. Maps of Europe cover the walls. Colored pins mark factories, rail yards, and oil refineries across the German Reich. At the center of the room stands Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe. Around him sit engineers, economists, and industrial planners, men responsible for keeping Germany's war machine running. One question dominates the discussion. Can Allied bombers destroy Germany's industry? Several scientists exchange skeptical glances. Professor Karl Krauch, an influential industrial chemist connected to IG Farben, leans over the map. The British are bombing cities, he says calmly. Residential areas, harbors, rail lines. He taps a small dot representing an aircraft factory. But individual factories? From 20,000 feet. He shakes his head. The mathematics simply do not support it. Other analysts nod. At that altitude, a bomb dropped from an aircraft does not fall straight down. Wind pushes it. Turbulence shifts it. The aircraft itself may move slightly off course. Even small deviations mean a bomb might miss its target by hundreds of meters. To the German planners, the conclusion seems obvious. Strategic bombing cannot reliably destroy precise industrial targets. Entire cities may burn, yes, but Germany's industry is decentralized, protected, spread across hundreds of facilities. Factories will repair damage quickly. Production will continue. Some even argue that Allied bombing might strengthen German morale. After all, the Luftwaffe had already demonstrated this logic during the Blitz against Britain. German bombers had devastated parts of London, yet Britain continued fighting. The idea that the same strategy could cripple Germany seemed unrealistic. In fact, German planners were far more concerned about something else entirely. Ground invasion, armies, tanks crossing borders, bombers? Annoying perhaps, but decisive? Hardly. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, American planners are studying the problem from a completely different perspective. In a quiet classroom at Maxwell Field, Alabama, officers of the U.S. Army Air Corps Tactical School examine aerial photographs projected on a screen. One officer points to an industrial complex. This factory produces ball bearings, he says. Another image appears. This refinery produces aviation fuel. Another. This plant manufactures aircraft engines. The theory they develop is radical. Instead of bombing cities, they will bomb systems. Destroy the critical nodes of an enemy's industrial network. The factories producing specialized components and entire industries will collapse. It's called precision bombing, but the theory faces one enormous challenge: accuracy. To make it work, bombers must strike targets no larger than a few hundred meters across from altitudes exceeding 20,000 feet. A nearly impossible task. That's when American engineers begin perfecting a remarkable device: the Norden bombsight. Inside the bombsight is a complex mechanical computer capable of calculating wind speed, aircraft velocity, altitude, and bomb trajectory. To American crews, it becomes almost mythical. They are told it can hit a pickle barrel for miles above the earth. Bombardiers swear an oath to protect its secrets. If captured, they must destroy it immediately. And so, as the war intensifies, two very different assumptions take shape. German planners believe bombing accuracy will always remain limited. American strategists believe technology will make precision destruction possible. For a while, reality seems to support the German view. Early bombing missions over Europe produce mixed results. Bombs scatter across wide areas. Factories survive. Production continues. German analysts review damage reports and quietly feel vindicated. See, one engineer reportedly remarks during a 1942 meeting, "The Americans believe their bombs fall like rifle bullets." He smiles faintly, but bombs are not bullets. In the skies above Europe, however, something is slowly changing. Allied crews are gaining experience. Navigation improves. Formation flying becomes tighter. Radar aids begin guiding bombers through clouds. And most importantly, the Allies begin studying their targets with extraordinary care. Photographs from reconnaissance aircraft are examined frame by frame. Analysts identify weak points in industrial networks. Ball bearings, synthetic oil, aircraft engines. They are learning where to strike and how often. By 1943, a quiet realization begins spreading through Allied planning rooms. If a few factories can be destroyed repeatedly, entire industries might collapse. Meanwhile, deep inside Germany's industrial cities, production lines continue running day and night. Workers polish steel bearings. Engineers assemble aircraft engines. Managers check schedules and quotas. The war machine hums steadily. Many believe the factories are safe. After all, hitting them precisely from miles above the Earth still seems unlikely. But high above Europe, new bomber formations are already forming. Larger than ever before, more organized, more determined. And soon, over cities like Schweinfurt, Regensburg, and Ploiești, Germany's confidence will begin to crack. Because the next wave of bombers is not just aiming at cities. They are aiming at the heart of the machine itself. August 17, 1943. Morning light spreads across the airfields of East Anglia, England. Hundreds of ground crew members move between rows of heavy bombers preparing for takeoff. The smell of aviation fuel hangs thick in the air. Engines cough to life one after another, their deep rumble vibrating across the tarmac. Today's mission is unlike anything attempted before. Inside the briefing rooms hours earlier, the curtains were pulled closed. Armed guards stood at the doors. On the map board were two names: Regensburg, Schweinfurt, two of the most critical industrial targets in the entire German war economy. Regensburg houses the massive Messerschmitt aircraft factory, where Bf 109 fighters roll off production lines destined for the Luftwaffe. Schweinfurt produces something far less dramatic, but far more essential: ball bearings. Without them, aircraft engines seize. Tank turrets lock. Machine guns jam. Even factory machinery grinds to a halt. American planners had studied Germany's industrial system carefully. They realized something German economists had overlooked. Ball bearing production was concentrated. Destroy enough of it, and thousands of different weapon systems would begin failing at once. The plan was simple in theory. Two massive bomber formations would strike the factories directly. But there was a problem: range. American fighters, like the P-47 Thunderbolt, could escort bombers only part of the way into Germany. Beyond that distance, the bombers would be alone, for hundreds of miles, against the full strength of the Luftwaffe. Still, the mission moved forward. By mid-morning, 376 B-17 flying fortresses climb into the sky over England. The formations stretch across miles of airspace. Tight combat boxes designed to protect each bomber with overlapping machine gun fire. From the ground, the sound is overwhelming. Hundreds of engines roaring together. The Armada heads east, over the English Channel, across occupied France. Inside German radar stations, operators begin to notice something unusual. Not a small raid, not scattered bombers. A massive, organized formation moving deep into German airspace. Sirens begin sounding across airfields. Luftwaffe pilots sprint toward their fighters. Within minutes, Bf-109s and Fw-190s are climbing hard to intercept. The American bombers continue forward, flying straight and level toward their targets. Inside the lead aircraft of the Regensburg formation, the bombardier studies photographs clipped beside his Norden bombsight. The Messerschmitt factory complex is enormous. Long rectangular buildings, assembly halls, rail yards feeding parts into production lines. Hit those buildings and production stops. Miss them and the mission fails. Behind the bombers, German fighters begin to gather. The first attacks come fast. Fw-190s slash through the bomber formation, firing heavy cannons. Their shells punch through aluminum fuselages with terrifying force. A B-17 suddenly erupts into flames. Another spirals downward, trailing black smoke. Inside the formations, American gunners respond with walls of .50 caliber fire. Tracer rounds streak across the sky in bright orange arcs. It becomes a deadly dance repeated again and again. Attack, defend, climb, dive. But the bombers keep flying. Hours later, the Regensburg formation reaches its target. The bombardiers take control of the aircraft through their bomb sights, guiding the bombers directly toward the factories. Bomb bay doors open. The heavy bombers suddenly feel lighter as their payloads drop away. Below, explosions tear across the Messerschmitt complex. Roofs collapse. Assembly lines disappear in fire. German workers scatter through smoke-filled courtyards. The Regensburg strike is devastating. But hundreds of miles away, another formation is approaching Schweinfurt. And this one faces something even worse. The Luftwaffe has regrouped. Fresh fighters wait along the route. Wave after wave attacks the bombers as they approach the ball-bearing factories. Inside the American formation, gunners shout warnings constantly. Fighters at 12 o'clock. High 6. Break right. But the bombers cannot maneuver wildly. Precision bombing requires stability. They must fly straight, level, predictable, which makes them perfect targets. Flak bursts begin filling the sky. Black clouds of shrapnel explode around the bombers, shaking them violently. Still they press on. When the Schweinfurt factories finally appear in the bomb sites, the bombardiers know the entire mission depends on this moment. Ball-bearing plants stretch across the city. Factories that supply nearly every major weapon system Germany produces. The bombs begin to fall. One formation after another releases its payload. And within minutes, enormous columns of smoke rise over Schweinfurt. Factory roofs collapse inward. Production halls vanish beneath explosions. Rail lines twist under the blast waves. The heart of Germany's precision engineering industry is suddenly in ruins. For the first time, Allied bombers have struck directly at one of the most delicate points in the Nazi war machine. But victory comes at a terrible price. As the surviving bombers turn west toward England, the Luftwaffe attacks again and again. By the time the battered formations finally reach friendly airspace, dozens of bombers are missing. Crews stare at empty gaps in the formation where entire aircraft once flew. The losses are staggering, but something else has happened. Something the German planners once believed impossible. A single industrial system has been hit precisely and crippled. Inside German economic offices, new reports begin arriving. Production numbers, factory damage assessments, supply shortages. At first, many analysts assume the effects will be temporary. Factories can be repaired, machines replaced, workers reassigned. But as the weeks pass, a troubling pattern begins to emerge. Ball-bearing production across Germany is collapsing. And that collapse is beginning to spread, slowly, quietly, through every part of the German war economy. Late October 1943, Berlin. Inside the offices of Albert Speer, Germany's Minister of Armaments and War Production, The atmosphere has grown noticeably tense. Stacks of production reports cover the long conference table. Factory output charts, logistics summaries, damage assessments from cities across the Reich. At first glance, the numbers do not look catastrophic. Aircraft production is still rising. Tank factories continue assembling Panzer IVs and Panthers. On paper, Germany's war economy appears remarkably resilient. But Speer is not looking at the totals. He is studying the details. One report in particular keeps appearing. Ball bearings. Speer adjusts his glasses and flips through another industrial briefing. Across multiple factories, the same pattern is emerging. Shortages. Assembly lines pausing for hours, sometimes days. Engineers requesting emergency shipments from substitute suppliers. Production delays spreading through the system like hairline cracks in glass. The reason is painfully simple. Ball bearings are everywhere. Every aircraft engine contains dozens of them. Tank transmissions rely on them. Machine tools inside the factories themselves depend on them to function. When the Schweinfurt factories were hit, German planners assumed production would recover quickly. Repairs were rushed. Machinery was relocated. Emergency production orders were issued to smaller factories. But the bombing had done more than destroy buildings. It shattered precision machinery that required months, sometimes years, to replace. Some machines had been custom-built before the war. Others relied on materials that were now scarce. Speer begins to realize something unsettling. The Allies are not bombing randomly. They are studying Germany's industrial system, and they are striking exactly where the system is weakest. In another room inside the ministry, economists and engineers debate the implications. One analyst gestures toward a map showing bomb damage across several industrial cities. They cannot keep hitting these targets repeatedly, he argues. Our factories are dispersed. Production will shift. But another economist shakes his head slowly. They do not need to destroy everything, he says. They only need to disrupt enough key components. That word hangs in the air. Components. Germany's war economy is incredibly complex. Thousands of factories feeding parts into larger assembly plants. Aircraft engines from one city. Precision instruments from another. Ball bearings from Schweinfurt. If even one of those links fails, the entire chain weakens. Meanwhile, the Allies are not stopping. In the skies over Germany, bomber formations continue appearing week after week. Some target aircraft factories. Others strike synthetic oil plants. Still others return to ball-bearing facilities again and again. The raids are costly for the bombers. American and British crews face relentless Luftwaffe attacks and heavy anti-aircraft fire. But the bombing grows more organized, more systematic. Allied intelligence analysts examine aerial photographs after every mission. They compare damage patterns, identify surviving buildings, plan follow-up strikes. Factories barely repaired 1 month are hit again the next. German engineers begin moving machinery underground. Production lines are relocated to tunnels, mines, and hidden facilities deep inside mountains. But relocation takes time, and time is exactly what Germany is running out of. Across the Reich, small signs of strain begin appearing. Aircraft production schedules slip. Engine deliveries arrive late. Tank factories report minor but persistent component shortages. Individually, each problem seems manageable, but together they form something far more dangerous. A slow strangulation of Germany's industrial capacity. Even the Luftwaffe begins to feel the effects. Fighter units complain about delayed engine replacements. Maintenance crews cannibalize damaged aircraft to keep others flying. Pilots begin noticing something they cannot quite explain. New aircraft are arriving more slowly, and those that do arrive sometimes lack spare parts. Far from the factories, the consequences ripple outward. At the front lines, German mechanics struggle to keep vehicles operational. Engines overheat, transmissions fail. Machines that once functioned perfectly begin breaking down more frequently. At first, no one connects these problems directly to the bombing. But inside Albert Speer's office, the pattern is becoming impossible to ignore. Germany's war machine is still running, but it is no longer running smoothly. And the Allies have only begun to exploit its weaknesses. Because in Allied planning rooms, a new target has already been selected. A target even more critical than ball bearings. A resource without which no army, no tank, and no aircraft can fight. Oil. Soon, the bombers will come for Germany's fuel. And when they do, the consequences will be far more devastating. May 12, 1944. Dawn over Luna, Germany. The first thing workers notice is the sound. A distant rumble that seems almost like thunder rolling across the horizon. Inside the enormous Luna synthetic oil plant, thousands of laborers move between towering steel towers and pipes that twist like metallic vines across the complex. This facility is one of the most important industrial sites in the entire German Reich, because Germany has very little natural oil. Instead, the country depends on massive chemical plants like this one to turn coal into synthetic fuel. Fuel that powers panzer divisions, Luftwaffe fighters, and the trucks that keep Germany's armies moving. Without these plants, the German military simply cannot function. For years, Allied planners debated whether bombing these facilities was worth the risk. The plants were heavily defended, surrounded by dense rings of anti-aircraft guns. Attacking them would be costly. But by 1944, the logic had become unavoidable. Ball bearings had weakened the machine. Oil could stop it completely. The rumble above Luna grows louder. Air raid sirens begin to scream. Workers freeze in place for a moment. Some look upward through gaps in the clouds. Then they see them. Bombers. Hundreds of them. Massive formations of B-17 flying fortresses and B-24 liberators. Their wings catching the morning sunlight. The sky fills with silver shapes stretching from horizon to horizon. This is no random raid. This is a deliberate strike at the heart of Germany's fuel supply. Inside the lead bomber formation, the bombardier peers through his Norden bombsight. The Luna complex spreads beneath him like a giant metal labyrinth. Towers, pipelines, storage tanks, cooling plants, an entire chemical city dedicated to producing fuel. Flak bursts begin appearing almost immediately. Black explosions blossom across the sky, each one spraying razor-sharp fragments of steel. The bomber formation shudders as shock waves ripple through it. Steady, steady. The bombardier keeps his eyes fixed on the target. Because synthetic oil plants are fragile in ways most factories are not. Pipes rupture easily. Refineries explode when struck. And fires inside chemical facilities can burn for days. Below, German anti-aircraft crews fire relentlessly. Massive 88mm guns thunder again and again, their shells exploding among the bombers. Then the Luftwaffe arrives. Fighters climb toward the formation, weaving between flak bursts. Focke-Wulf FW-190s surge forward, cannons blazing. But something has changed since the earlier raids of 1943. The bombers are no longer alone. Out of the sunlight above them, sleek new fighters dive toward the German interceptors. P-51 Mustangs. Long-range escort fighters that can now accompany bombers all the way into Germany. Their arrival transforms the air battle instantly. Mustangs slash through the Luftwaffe formations, forcing German pilots into desperate defensive maneuvers. For the first time in the war, American bombers are striking deep industrial targets with powerful fighter protection. And that changes everything. Inside the bombers, the bombardiers finally see their moment. The Luna complex fills the bomb site. Storage tanks, refining towers, miles of pipelines carrying synthetic fuel. Bombs away. The first bombs fall. Then another wave. Then another. hundreds of explosives drop into the heart of the chemical plant. The explosions are catastrophic. Towers collapse. Pipelines rupture in violent bursts of flame. Fuel storage tanks erupt into towering fireballs that send black smoke thousands of feet into the air. Within minutes, the entire refinery complex becomes a burning inferno. Fire spreads rapidly through the maze of pipes and machinery. Workers run through smoke-filled corridors, searching for exits. Emergency crews try desperately to contain the blaze, but the damage is overwhelming, and the bombers are not finished. Across Germany, other synthetic fuel plants are struck in rapid succession. Merseburg, Politz, Blechhammer, one after another. The facilities that produced Germany's lifeblood begin to fall. Inside Albert Speer's ministry, the reports arrive quickly. Fuel production dropping. Refineries destroyed. Emergency repairs underway. At first, Speer believes recovery might still be possible. But the raids keep coming. Again and again. Factories barely repaired are bombed once more. Each time, the damage becomes harder to fix. And slowly, across the German military, a terrifying reality begins to emerge. Fighters cannot fly without fuel. Tanks cannot move without fuel. Trucks cannot supply armies without fuel. The war machine that once surged across Europe now begins to stall. Pilots receive fewer training hours. Tank divisions conserve every drop of gasoline. Entire units remain grounded, waiting for fuel shipments that never arrive. And in the skies above Germany, the Allied bombers keep returning, because by now the strategy is clear. The Allies are not simply bombing cities. They are dismantling the system that powers the German war effort, piece by piece. And as 1944 progresses, even the most optimistic German planners begin to understand something chilling. The bombing is no longer just damaging factories. It is slowly destroying Germany's ability to fight. But the full realization, the moment when German leaders finally understand how precise and devastating these raids have become, is still coming. September 1944, Berlin. Rain taps softly against the tall windows of the Reich Ministry of Armaments and War Production. Inside the dimly lit conference room, several of Germany's most senior industrial experts sit in silence. Stacks of damage reports cover the table. Photographs from reconnaissance aircraft, production charts, fuel statistics. At the head of the table sits Albert Speer. Only a year earlier, Speer had believed Germany's industrial system could survive almost anything. Despite heavy bombing, production had continued rising through much of 1943. Factories adapted. Workers repaired damage. Engineers relocated machinery. For a time, it seemed as though Germany had solved the problem. But now the numbers tell a different story. Speer slowly flips through the latest report from the synthetic oil plants. Fuel production has fallen catastrophically. Facilities at Luna, Merseburg, and Blechhammer, once the backbone of Germany's fuel supply, are barely functioning. Some operate at less than 10% of their pre-war capacity. Without fuel, aircraft cannot fly. Without aircraft, Germany cannot defend its skies. And without control of the skies, the bombers come whenever they choose. Around the table, engineers and economists speak quietly. One of them, a senior industrial planner, gestures toward a chart showing aircraft engine production. "We still have the factories," he says. "Many were repaired after earlier raids." Another man nods slowly. "Yes," he replies, "but we no longer have the fuel to run them." The room falls silent again. This is the moment when the illusion finally collapses. For years, German scientists had argued that strategic bombing could never destroy specific industrial systems with precision. Bombers were too inaccurate. Factories were too resilient. Repairs would always keep production moving. But the Allies had proven something far more dangerous. They did not need perfect accuracy. They only needed persistence. Strike the same targets repeatedly. Study the damage carefully. Return again and again. Eventually, even the strongest industrial network begins to fracture. Speer stands and walks toward the large map on the wall. Colored pins mark industrial centers across Germany. Ball-bearing factories in Schweinfurt. Aircraft plants in Regensburg. Synthetic oil refineries scattered throughout Central Europe. Many of the pins now have small black circles drawn around them, symbols indicating repeated bombing damage. Speer stares at the map for a long moment. Then he says quietly, "The Americans are not bombing randomly." The men in the room already know this. Speer continues, "They are dismantling our industry piece by piece." He points first to Schweinfurt, ball bearings, then to the oil plants, fuel, then to the aircraft factories, production. The pattern is unmistakable. Each strike weakens a critical part of the system. Each raid makes recovery harder. Each month the damage grows more difficult to repair. Outside Berlin, the effects are now visible everywhere. At Luftwaffe airfields, aircraft sit idle for lack of fuel. Pilots receive minimal training hours, sometimes only a few flights, before being sent into combat. In tank depots, mechanics struggle to keep armored vehicles operational using salvage parts. Panzer divisions preparing for battle must ration every liter of gasoline. Even Germany's famous Tiger tanks, once symbols of overwhelming strength, are sometimes abandoned simply because there is no fuel to move them. On the Eastern Front, Soviet forces advance steadily westward. In the West, Allied armies push deeper into France and Belgium. And above it all, the bombers continue to come. Day after day, hundreds of aircraft crossing the German skies. Sometimes escorted by long-range fighters. Sometimes arriving in massive waves that darken the horizon. German air defenses still fight back fiercely. But the balance has shifted. The Luftwaffe is running out of experienced pilots. Factories cannot replace aircraft quickly enough. Fuel shortages limit training and combat operations. The sky that once belonged to Germany is now dominated by Allied bombers. And the scientists who once dismissed precision bombing are forced to confront a painful truth. They misunderstood the nature of the weapon. Strategic bombing was never just about explosives. It was about analysis, planning, relentless pressure. It was about finding the small, fragile points that held an entire industrial system together, then striking those points again, and again, and again. By late 1944, even the most loyal German planners know the war economy is collapsing. Speer himself will later admit something remarkable after the war. If the Allied bombing campaign against oil had begun earlier, the war might have ended much sooner. Because by the time Germany finally understood the true power of precision bombing, it was already far too late. Yendi.